All right, we are live on Facebook and on Zoom. Dr. Delafontaine, take it away.
Welcome to this Tulane University School of Medicine Community Town Hall. I'm Patrick Delafontaine, Executive Dean of the School of Medicine, and today we are going to discuss issues of social isolation and stress. Social distancing is our new normal, and with stay-at-home orders can come stress, loneliness, and other issues related to social isolation. We have a great panel of experts and a great moderator with Sharon, Courtney, Vice President of Government and Community Relations at Tulane, and Sharon will introduce the panelists. Before getting to the roundtable, however, let me show you some information on the current status of the COVID epidemic, both globally and here in our state. As you can see on this slide, this pandemic spares no one. As of now, there have been well over 70,000 deaths. In fact, these data are from yesterday, and we are now much closer to 80,000 deaths. The United States leads the world in number of confirmed cases, and in fact, the US cases today are well over 350,000 with over 11,000 deaths. In red arrows, you can see data relating to Orleans and Jefferson Parish. This is the impact across the state, and this is data from yesterday. And you can see at that time, we had almost all our parishes reporting cases, with 512 reported deaths. That number today, as of noon, has unfortunately gone up to 582 reported deaths in Louisiana and well over 16,000 cases. And we now have only one parish that is not affected. When you look at the parishes affected, Orleans and Jefferson Parish lead the state in number of cases. Now, this data was put out yesterday and seems to show a glimmer of hope in that the blue curve shows you patients in hospitals in Louisiana, and you can see a little bit of flattening of that curve. I will say, however, that these data were just in the last few minutes corrected by the Department of Health at the state level, and the number of hospitalizations yesterday was higher than what is indicated, although the number today does appear to indicate that it is flattening. The yellow curve shows you the number of patients on ventilators in the state. And I think we can clearly see that over the last 3 days, there is some flattening of this curve, which is obviously a good sign. Tulane providers have been on the forefront of this pandemic. Tulane has been providing clinical services at Tulane Medical Center, at the Veterans Administration Hospital, and at University Medical Center. And together, 28 faculty teams and more than 150 residents and fellows are taking care of these patients. In all, we have taken care of more than 250 COVID-19 positive or COVID-19 suspected patients. Yesterday, the convention center in New Orleans opened with a 1,000-bed hospital taking care of non-critical COVID-19 positive patients. And Dr. John Carson, one of our faculty, is the Chief Medical Officer in the Convention Center Hospital. Tulane has done a significant amount of work in testing and research and will continue to do a lot of work in this area. The Tulane University School of Medicine has established Covert testing and is currently testing about 100 samples a day, giving results within 12 to 24 hours using the CDC test. Our main hospital, that is Tulane Medical Center, in partnership with University Medical Center, is testing using the Roche platform, giving results in 4 to 12 hours. And yesterday, a new, very quick test, the Abbott platform, was implemented at Tulane Medical Center, which allows quick assessment of emergency room patients in particular. We are doing a lot of work in research. Clinical trials are starting, offering hope for these patients. New rapid diagnostics, in particular blood and saliva-based, are under development at Tulane. And there is a large effort on vaccine development and serologic testing. There have been approaches, novel approaches regarding to personal protective equipment. Our Tulane School of Medicine medical students organized a nationwide drive to get personal protective equipment to Tulane. Thousands of these, including N95 masks, have been donated and distributed to hospitals and healthcare providers. Re-sterilization of N95 masks by the Tulane National Primate Research Center is being planned using vaporized hydrogen peroxide. And a collaboration with Battelle Corporation will extend this capability. So I want to take an opportunity to thank all of you that have been working so hard through this pandemic. This includes, of course, faculty, residents, nurses, technicians, custodial facilities and security and cafeteria staff, students, support, and administrative staff. You are all making a great difference each and every day, and the school is immensely grateful for what you do. I'm now going to turn over the presentation to Sharon Courtney, Vice President for Government and Community Relations.
Call if you can hear me. Okay, good. It said I was muted, so sorry. Thanks again for joining us today. This is the second town hall that I've hosted, and today's subject matter is near and dear to a lot of our hearts and something that's really been on our mind, which is that of social isolation and stress. So we have an amazing panel today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And I'm going to start with Stacy Drury. So Stacy, can you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your area of expertise? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Can I interrupt? Sorry, I forgot the most important thing. If you have questions, please don't forget to submit those via Zoom chat or on Facebook Live so that we can answer the questions that you have. Sorry, Stacy.
Can I go now? You sure?
Yes.
Okay. So I am Stacy Drury. I am a child psychiatrist at Tulane and the chief research officer at Tulane, or not at Tulane, Children's Hospital. Did you want more, or is that okay?
That's great. Tonya?
Hi, I'm Tonya Hansel. I'm a social worker with the Tulane School of Social Work and an associate professor.
Carrie?
I am Carrie Weiland. I'm a senior professor of practice in the psychology department, and I am a social psychologist.
And Karen, thanks for joining us.
Hi, I'm Karen Weissbecker. I'm the Director of Student Support and Wellness for the medical students. I also have a social work degree, but along with my genetics degree, but I'm here because of that position, Director of Student Support and Wellness.
Great. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. And as I said earlier, don't forget to send your questions in via Facebook Live or Zoom chat. We can answer what's on your mind. So I'm going to start with Stacy Drury and ask the simple question about how we explain social distancing to children.
So thank you. Yeah, so I think it's a really fun question for me. So as a child psychiatrist, I spend a lot of time coming up with fun games and ways to explain things. And so part of this is really looking at the age of the child that you're explaining social distancing to. So for little kids, you can use descriptions like bubbles, or you can say you have to be in your bubble today. And you can use chalk on a sidewalk to draw a circle to say you got to have this much distance between you and other people. Dancing and games, and really not playing Twister, but the opposite of Twister, are important modeling things for it. When we talk about explaining sort of just the physical structure, that's really what we want to talk to for little kids. We don't need to go into elaborate details about, well, this is the radius of, you know, the spray of a sneeze. I have a great video for that for older kids. But the idea is to give them concrete representation of something that you want them to do. So you don't necessarily need to link social distancing to the pandemic for kids under 4, 5, or 6. You really just want to say, this is a new way that we're interacting with people. This is a new game we're playing. I know it's different and hard, and it won't always be like this. But I think that it's really important to remember the developmental stage that children are at, in terms of how you link both what your expectations are and the explanation that you give them. When we think about middle age, like middle school age children, we can give them a little bit more details, right? So this is about changing how you interact with people. Think about this as being in your line at school and making sure that if the line stops suddenly, you don't bump into the kid in front of you. That's kind of like the distance that we want. And here you can start to give them a little bit more information about what might be happening to warrant social distancing, right? So that we have this virus, right? You can use the term virus. Don't be afraid of using actual words. It's kind of like when we tried to explain sex to our kids, we didn't want to use like actual words. We made those words up. No need. We can use the word virus. They've heard the word virus, right? Every child has seen their classmates with the snotty, runny nose, right? And so social distancing is so that that snotty, runny nose that you can't see, because it's a little bit more tricky to see in this case, is what we don't want to get on us. So for middle school age kids, you really can use a little bit more information. You know, I thought about this a lot for teenagers, and really they're socially distanced all the time, because even when they're sitting next to each other, they're texting, right? So how often do they actually like look at each other when they're sitting next to each other? They have been like doing whatever, if I say Facebook, they'll make fun of me, but whatever social media thing, I mean, TikTok has been exploding. Why? Because this was one of their means of communication anyway, right? So it becomes really thinking about the developmental stage that you're at for your child and for you, depending on your developmental stage. But incorporating a little bit of knowledge for the little kids. So this is what we're doing right now. We're playing this game about staying in our bubble. As the kids get a little bit older, really incorporating kind of things that they have seen. So everybody has been told they can't go to school today because they have a cold, right? We're not doing that much different. We're doing it at a bigger level, but I think one of the really important things for kids is to normalize that whenever anybody had a fever, we didn't let them go to school, right? And right now it's a little tricky because not everybody gets a fever. And that's why we're not letting people go to school. But you're learning all these new things about how you can communicate and stay in touch. And so I think really when we explain social distancing for little kids to be very concrete, for middle school age kids to give them a little bit more information, and for teenagers, say you're giving them a license to interact the way that they've always interacted, and now they just don't have to hug their grandparents, right? So there's no more of that squeezing of the cheeks that you used to get. When we talk about the reason for social distancing, again, we want to use information that is age appropriate. right? And so it's been really important to talk to little kids about, and actually to all kids, about this is something that you can do to help keep other people safe. You know, the people that are on this call, I was thinking about it, your scientists, your academics, your physicians, your healthcare providers, we are the worst at being told we can't fix something, right? And so my bet is we've spent a lot of time instructing our children that when they see a problem, they have to fix it. And so it's a lot harder for us as people in academics and for healthcare providers and for scientists. Say, well, you know, here's this thing, we can't fix it. The only thing we can do is to keep ourselves safe and keep our distance from people that we didn't have to use to do that to. And so I think it's really important to, instead of having this be a negative, to reframe it, to talk about social distancing as a way that we can help our friends stay healthy, as one thing among all these things we're being told not to do that we can do on our own that allows us to help our communities. And if your kids have healthcare providers, to help them stay safe. And if your kids have grandparents, to help them stay safe. So every time they remember to do social distancing, to not pick their nose, to wash their hands, that this is actually like a really powerful tool and probably one of the strongest tools we have to keep all of their friends and family safe.
Great. Thanks, Stacy. I may actually use that chalk idea for adults because I think adults could use some help on social distancing as well.
That would be the tape at Costco, because people can't estimate spaces, but we will, and it's weird because they use blue. I really think they should use red lines. We need like colors that are age appropriate for grown-ups, like stop. But we're doing the same thing in Costco.
So Tonya, New Orleans has sort of a unique perspective on things of stress, moments of stress when they happen because of Katrina. I know personally, I felt like I've had a little PTSD at the beginning of this. And so I'm curious about whether you see parallels between what happened to New Orleans and Katrina and today, and whether or not this would classify as a disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of parallels, I think, that we can draw on this. And I think one of the most important ones is that we persevered through Katrina and came out stronger for it. And I have every belief that that's going to be the same thing that's going to happen now. And this is a disaster. It's a massive amount of damage, economic damage. We're experiencing a massive amount of loss of life for either directly or people know of someone that has lost someone dear to them. And all of that means that it really is in that classification of biological disaster that we're experiencing and really the world is experiencing.
Thank you. Karen, we're sort of, Stacy talked a lot about sort of school kids and teenagers, but a lot of people have college and grad students in home, and this has been a unique experience for them as well. Are there special issues for college and grad students that have been sort of tossed into a new environment and out of their academic regular academic environment?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. First of all, for my medical students, and I think the graduate students and probably a lot of the undergrad, these are high achieving kids who tend, I say kids, but they're not, they're young adults who have high expectations on themselves. And they're finding they're having trouble concentrating and they can't learn the stuff the way they want to do. And that's adding stress because they have the expectations on themselves. And they have to lower them because these are not normal times. They're learning how to Zoom just like everybody else. And I think the social distancing is hard at that age because social groups are so important and your friends and support from your friends. So I usually tell them like social distancing isn't social isolation. You got to find your other ways to do that. I say, as you pointed out, because one of the other questions is related, everyone's in a different situation. Some are thrown back in with their families as young adults. Some are staying on their own and are more isolated because they're staying by themselves. So there's a real variability in what's happening with the students, I think. Yeah, but being able to let go of that all that they're supposed to be doing. And the unknown, I think, is harder. The uncertainty of what's happening next is harder at this age group, I think. I mean, it's hard for us. You know, I think that's like, we can only take it one day at a time. And I think that's really hard when you're in your 20s to like not know, you know, and you've got graduating students who aren't getting graduation, and their friends moved back where they were going and they were torn away from them without being able to really say goodbye or have that closure or that thing you've worked for 4 years to get to, whether it's high school graduation, college graduation, or med school graduation. So those are some of the unique things I'm seeing in this group.
Thank you. Carrie, let's talk a little bit about self-care and how we take care of ourselves, and the idea that when we tend to be more isolated, some of the demons and doubts about ourselves that we usually can put aside in day-to-day life creep in. What advice do you have for people?
That's a really important question. I think when we think of self-care, we often think of good sleep, good diet, you know, eating healthy, exercising, and all of those things are still important now. And it's important to think about maybe a little creatively about how we are incorporating those things. If exercise was going to the gym, maybe you need to come up with a new routine. I think that it can be a challenge when we're thrown off of our routine to try to reestablish a new routine that includes those same self-care tactics as before. However, it is really important to try to find that new routine. And hopefully, you know, we are a few weeks into this. We have kind of started to learn some new routines. And if you haven't, and I know that for some people, maybe students in particular, being thrown out, and the first thing is like, I just want to crawl in bed and not see anyone, they'll spend time crying and all this, and that is normal. But trying to think about, okay, what is something I can do? For some people, that might mean getting up in the morning and getting dressed, even if they don't have to, right? It may make them feel better, right? Getting that walk in or doing some yoga online. So trying to find those routines that can reestablish those healthy, good self-care habits. The other side of self-care, like you mentioned, and ties to what Karen said as well, is a mindset. And I don't think we always recognize this as self-care, but taking a mindset of self-compassion is really, really important during this time. I think we are putting a lot of pressure on ourselves like we normally do, but we, in this case, are thrown out of our regular routines and expectations, and everything's kind of gone haywire, but many of us are still putting all these expectations of, I need to be extra productive because I'm not going into work, or I need to make sure I am getting my kids engaged with all of these different online forums and opportunities, and I need to be doing everything all at once, and I'm not doing a great job. And we experience, you know, guilt for feeling stressed when we think, oh, okay, well, I know I'm lucky and everything is fine, and I know other people are struggling more. And so we have all these kind of self-doubt that we're not doing enough, guilt that we feel bad about things. And I think the first thing to do in sort of shifting our mindset as a part of self-care is to recognize that those feelings are normal, that we're all kind of going through, I like thinking about it a little bit as like a collective grief, right? That we're all missing things and people and opportunities. And it is hard, no matter how big or little your experience of stress is, it is hard for everyone right now. And so understanding that it's okay to be feeling those things. And then once we accept that, then saying, okay, well, what can I do about it? How can I socially connect when this is challenging and different? How can I get my exercise in? And knowing that, you know, it's okay to not do everything. It's okay to not be perfect, and feel like, you know, you're getting everything done and teaching your class is perfect, or your research, or your kids, and kind of just accepting that and knowing we're doing a great job. I think that that kind of mindset is really important for self-care right now.
Thank you. Yeah, I find actually reminding myself to take like an hour to do gardening or cooking or something takes me out of my head for a little bit during the day. Tonya, just to follow up on that a little bit, you know, we're now weeks or a month into this, and there are people who are stressed out about just doing their everyday things, and they're worried about just going out in public and getting the virus. And what are some tips you have for just each day for people?
I think, and this goes for all age groups, and what our panelists have spoken about today is that just kind of establishing a routine, even if it changes, or just kind of having something that you're looking forward to every day, like a treat or something. And that might not be your normal kind of reward system that you're used to using. It might just be kind of sitting down to enjoy a cup of coffee. If that's something that you're always usually on the rush, trying to get out the door and trying to manage a number of things. So really being kind of in the moment and appreciating the small kind of rewards that you can do for yourself are really important. And I think that routine goes for all age groups, and whether it is you just wake up and you get ready, if that's how you need to kind of get your brain in gear to say, hey, we're starting a new day, or if it's some kind of nighttime ritual that you want to, you know, to improve your sleep hygiene. All of those types of things can really be helpful, and some of them may be very small, but it needs to be something that you kind of repetitively do and can look forward to every day.
So I'm going to just follow up one more time on this for everybody, whoever wants to answer this, because it's something I hear from my friends, which is how to deal with the fear of the virus itself and the fact that you may have allergies, or you might have a cold, or there's something else in the air. But the minute, like, all of us go to that place instantly of, oh no, I have the virus. What are your like tips for dealing with like the fear and anxiety that comes with that piece precisely?
Well, I think knowing that for most people, for the majority of people that do, even in our current statistics, most of the people that do have COVID, even if they're not officially diagnosed, do recuperate, right? That they do get better. And so I think that can help minimize that fear. Of course, if you have you're in that risk factor, have those pre-existing conditions that would make you more vulnerable, I think having a little bit of fear about that is important. And that can be a protective mechanism to remind us to, when we go out, to cover our faces, even if you're not feeling symptomatic, or for as a preventative measure, and to really engage in those social distancing recommendations, because that's really what's going to protect you and protect others.
Anybody else, Carrie or Stacy?
Yeah, I would add that one of the things, I'm a news junkie usually, but I have found I really have to be mindful, and we all are hitting on that term mindful, not necessarily in ways of like being meditation, but of really being in the moment. But I have to be really mindful not to let myself constantly be listening to everything and reading Twitter and all those other things. We have to put up some healthy boundaries for ourselves for all that news. You want to stay informed, but yeah, I mean, it was getting to me. I think it gets to everybody. So you have to find your balance of being informed without letting it drive you nuts.
Stacy, I feel like you were about to say something.
Yeah. I think two things. One is, as a parent, you need to know where your anxiety is, because how you help your children of any age through this process requires owning and modeling that you have anxiety. So there's no one out there that doesn't have anxiety, but everybody has different levels, and it is this roller coaster, right? So there are times when our anxiety is super high and times when we don't have any anxiety. And so really important to be aware of what your own is, and that there isn't a right amount of anxiety. You know, we talk about a little stress being a good thing, but I measure stress, but I have no idea what that little is. So I think that it's really important that you know your own anxiety. And then the second one is an analogy that I use for all of my patients, so bear with me on this. So kids are really, really scared of the boogeyman, right? But nowadays, nobody is scared of a vampire. And why is that? Well, it turns out that starting at a really early age, and now more and more because of like Vampire Diaries and other things, everybody knows that vampires can't go out into daylight, that they get all sorts of messed up with holy water. And we know how to kill them and control them, right? So we can run around in a park outside, except for the Vampire Diaries with that weird ring thing, and we're not going to be bothered by a vampire. What scares us about a boogeyman is what we don't know. We don't know where he comes from. We don't know how to get rid of him, all of those things. And so the way that we try to help kids with anxiety is we talk about what it is that they know, and we compartmentalize the things that they don't know. So we don't know who everybody is that has it. And some people may never know, and then they'll get this weird immunity thing that we'll study and bottle here at Tulane and sell to everybody. But we also have all these really cool and not so challenging tools to keep us safe, right? So you can go home and make soap. And every time you use your soap that you made, you are actually keeping yourself safe from this thing that you have a little bit of worry about. So I really think this idea of using, and I want to emphasize Karen's limit your exposure to it, but take the knowledge that is there and say, these are our tools. And these are the things that we have. And we actually have a lot of tools. Now, we also have to own that the tools are changing daily, and there are certain people we should listen to, like the CDC, and certain people that maybe we shouldn't listen to. I'm always going to listen to John Shefflin because he's really smart. But like, take your information and use that as, for kids, your weapons, your tools, your guidelines, so that they can use that to help control their anxiety. And then the other thing is to create worry time, where you just sort of write down all your worries, and you give yourself 5 minutes, and you say, what if? And you write them all down. And then you say, okay, I've done that for today. But I think that it's important for parents to own their own levels of worry, to accept that everybody's levels of worries are different, and to really seek out good information so that we have tools to help keep us as safe as possible.
Thanks. I really like the idea. I like the idea that we're creating a whole generation of Buffy the Vampire Slayers against COVID. I like that.
These are things I tell my students who are older, obviously, than the kids that Stacy's talking about. The other follow-up on that is a question of, there's so much we can't control right now. And again, I told you, my students, like, they plan things out. They want to know what's coming next. And so if you focus on what you can control. So again, that follows up on what Carrie said, what Tonya said, of you can control your schedule for today. You can control what you're doing for your well-being. I can try to control my looking at the news in the right amount of time. So that the same thing with, we acknowledge the worry, we acknowledge the anxiety, we acknowledge that there's things we can't control, and let's focus on what is it we can control. And like, I like the idea of the timing, like give yourself time to worry and then put it aside.
Carrie and Tonya, everyone's teleworking right now. And so they're trying to be, supposedly everyone's trying to be productive, but it's hard for people to balance being at home and their kids and not being available for their kids because they're at home, but they're actually at work. And so people then feel guilty. So how would you suggest people try to balance those issues? Right. Carrie's muted.
Am I?
Right.
Okay.
Start all over, Carrie. Start all over.
Sorry. I think one of the most important things is awareness, and this ties to what some of the panelists have already said, that, you know, either what Karen said about being aware of what we're consuming, what Stacy was saying about what we're aware of, what our anxieties are and what we can and can't control, and all those things. I think also being aware of what the expectations are and where they're coming from. I'm finding a lot of people are putting expectations on themselves to be extra productive, to be extra perfect, to manage everything. And if we can recognize that, you know, it's not my kid's teacher saying that he has to be perfect and I have to spend the entire day doing schoolwork with him. It's not my, you know, chair of my department saying that I better make sure that I get perfect course evaluations this year, right? Maybe those things are coming from me. And if I can have some awareness to that, I can maybe let it go and say, you know what, it's going to be okay. And I think that, one thing I have seen at Tulane is we are getting messages of the latter, right? That chairs are saying, course evaluations aren't going to matter so much this year and things like that. So if we can kind of lift some of the expectations we're putting on ourselves, I think that's going to help a lot manage the balance, right? And recognizing and communicating to our kids, to our partners, to, students, to communicate to their instructors, communicating with our students, coworkers about what we're struggling with, where the balance is. I know many people in my department have flat out said, I can't, get a lot done in the day because I'm with my kids, right? And so I think that in this time when we're all having these kinds of struggles with balance, that kind of communication and acceptance is really important. I think a lot of it comes from ourselves.
Yeah, I would also like to add that, one of the real treasures that we have right now is social media and helping people stay together. But there's also a lot of research showing that people don't really put their true selves. And so are we trying to hold ourselves to some unrealistic standard during times of stress when, we should just be focusing on good enough? And so I really do worry about that and how, those self-imposed expectations, like Carrie was mentioning, and making sure that we are accepting of what our capabilities are and when we're doing good enough by just kind of managing through the situation rather than putting these unnecessary restraints on ourselves.
Thanks. Yeah, people who will put Instagram on one side and real life on the other side, because they're usually pretty different. This is for Karen and Stacy, but Karen, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll go to Stacy. It's like, so all of our kids, no matter their age, young kids, high school, college, are all starting to miss big events that we sort of talked about, like graduations, recitals. There's big events in their lives. They're very big in their lives right now. Do you guys have any ideas on how to, I know that we could compensate for that, but how you sort of work with kids on sort of like, and help them get over the stress and anxiety of those issues? And Karen, I'll start with you.
I think that's a hard one. I have my own child who was supposed to graduate from college. One of the things I thought his university did well is they fairly quickly said, we're going to do it December. So they knew, when they said, we'll get back to it. So that idea of it's postponed, it's not canceled. We already just went through match day for my 4th years, and they tried to do it, through a Zoom kind of thing. It's hard. I don't know if I have an answer for that because there's a little bit of grieving. It's a bit of grieving because, I can't get back my birthday party I was supposed to have yesterday, with all my family and friends. So you got to recognize there are things we can't get that we want, and there's a little bit of grief involved with it, acknowledge it, and then also look forward to when we can. I mean, how many times do you end a conversation with until we can meet again kind of thing, and we can be together and give the full celebration that we've been looking forward to.
Yeah, I think one thing, we are encased in this uncertainty. And so for those of us who have ever gone to a restaurant and been told that our table would be ready in 15 minutes and it wasn't, and it was like 30 or 45 minutes and we were grumpy. But if they told us that our table would be ready in an hour and our table was ready in 30 minutes, we loved the hostess, right? So that matching expectations with what might happen in these events is really, really important. And so I think one thing about all of these kind of missing events, and it's a lot easier to say this because I live in New Orleans, which is we're going to find a way to make up that lost time. We are not a city that pulls away from having an excuse to have an extra party or a parade or another event. And how we do that and what we combine that with may be different. But I think it's really important to allow some creative thinking, some creative planning for these kind of things. For older kids, I think it is harder. because there is this connectedness, and I think there's this leaving from the place. But what can be done is that you can start to build those things that were important, to identify what it was going to be about that party or that event that was super, super important. Are there ways to create parts of it now? So can you do some of it? I mean, virtual is never going to be as much fun, but you can also create some very entertaining things, not on the healthcare Zoom, but on the other Zoom, to be able to do these things. Talk about learning new skills, challenging TikTok contests for kids, doing TikToks for birthday parties, but thinking as creatively as possible about this, and then managing the temporal expectation, which I think is a really hard thing in the area of uncertainty. And either projecting it out super far, like the hostess at a restaurant, and then, it might be super awesome if something does happen, in June or July. But I think this idea that there is just owning that it sucks, particularly for teenagers and adolescents, that it does suck. You can also take out your old prom dress pictures and say, you could have worn something like this that 30 years from now was horrifying. So there are ways to be like, hey, maybe it's good that you missed this prom. The 80s were kind of cruel with prom dresses. But I think this idea that there will be different kinds of memories that will be created around those events, and they potentially will be just as powerful. But not to lose the importance of the event. So never say, well, we missed that one. To make sure, particularly for kids of all ages, that there's this idea that it's not quite what we wanted, but we will pay attention to it, and we will make sure that we find a little way to celebrate now, and we'll incorporate this to something bigger later.
Thanks. Speak for yourself on your progress, by the way.
It was bad.
So this is a question we got from online, and I'll just throw this out there, is how does personality style figure in as far as being able to establish or reestablish alternative routines? For example, are extroverts better able or better equipped to handle this versus introverts? Which I would say no, but what do professionals think about that? Carrie, you want to take us? You want to start?
Sure. Yeah. So I think that there's not a clear answer because personality and individual differences are very complex. And on one hand, you could easily say, well, introverts, and I've seen memes, right? Introverts, this is the dream come true, right? But there's also evidence that like extroverts are actually better at figuring out ways to socially connect. And it's kind of easier maybe for an extrovert to connect on a live Zoom than an introvert who might be relying more on just chatting, which may be less social or less socially rewarding, right? So introversion, extroversion can play a role in terms of things like routine, the emotional affectivity. Sometimes we think of this as neuroticism can play a role, and how we're interpreting our stressful events, which is really important. And I think that the biggest thing is it comes down to knowing the self, right? So if for example, in terms of like your personality traits, that you are a type of person that is really conscientious and scheduling and, has a very detailed calendar, well, then that tells you figuring out the routine, writing, I have an Excel sheet for both me and my children throughout the week. So kind of figuring out what are the ways that you can adapt, and how are you going to get your needs met based a little bit on your personality characteristics, your individual needs and motivations. So personality does play a role. It plays a role in all we do. And I think that if we can think of it in terms of self-care, the awareness of how that might be playing a role, how that might be influencing our behaviors, and how we can use that for the best is what's really important.
I love that answer, Carrie. I think it's pointing again to self-compassion, and you can't change a person's stripes. And when you work with people, you have to acknowledge who you are, and I will always be a night person. I'm not going to get up early in the morning. It's if given my chances, right? So I can't all of a sudden say, well, I got to get up at 7 and get this done and all that. I have to work within who I am. And I think that that's a really, whether you're extroverted or introverted, you're going to have to find your ways of dealing with it that fit who you are. And I think that goes with self-compassion and self-awareness. It's a beautiful answer. I agree with you.
So Tonya, how do we deal with significant other we're at home with all day who has a much higher level of anxiety than we do, wants to talk about it all the time? Their anxiety can be contagious. Right. Yeah. Oh, there.
Yeah, I think everyone's anxiety is contagious right now. I think anyone who says that they're not anxious about the situation may not be quite self-aware, as our previous panelist said was so important. And it is, but I think going back on what they were talking about, knowing yourself, knowing when you are falling prey to added anxiety that you may not have, that you may not own that anxiety about that, and making sure that you're kind of checking in with yourself. One of my favorite acronyms is the HALT acronym, which means to check in with yourself on a regular basis, and whether you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And if we can manage those few things at the moment, and we kind of focus in on those rather than these unknowns and these uncertainties that we really don't have an answer for, and making sure that those things are, taken care of in ourselves and then in our families, I think we'll be better able to handle when we may be feeling and experiencing the anxiety of others.
Thanks. Stacy, are there behavior changes in children that parents should look for, things that might indicate they're having problems adjusting to what is our new normal for now?
So I think there are going to be behavior changes, and whether we want to pathologize them or just say, hey, this is different than how I cope, is an important distinction. And so I think one of the things is to recognize that for little kids, we often see regressions. When kids are stressed and sort of acute stress, we're in the middle of stress. So it's really important not to, I don't want to say panic, but not to get too anxious, because how kids process stress and anxiety is very different, both among kids, but also then grown-ups, right? So irritability, sleeping more, kids who have regression in behavior. So despite the fact that you're home, if you have a toddler, this may not be the best time to potty train. So really understanding that there may be some developmental regressions that happen. There also may be some positive things, and I think that is sometimes missed. So while we all may be stressed, there are also things about not having 55 places to go, so that there is downtime. And little children may see this as an advantage, and to not think that that's terrible. So I think from a behavior standpoint, super withdrawal would be something that you might want to pay more attention to. Ups and downs are going to happen. So I think you should really expect good days and bad days. And if you start to have a series of days where there's a lot of withdrawal or a lot of sadness or a lot of irritability, that maybe that would be a good time to sort of call one of our psychologists, or just to get an idea of what is happening. I think that, for little kids, if they've been sleeping on their own and they all of a sudden want to sleep in the bed with you, to understand that that is a stress response. Bedwetting in our toddlers can be a sign of stress. And we don't want to pathologize it right now because we're in the middle of something. And I think it's really important to disentangle what is a normative reaction from something that is pathologic. And that when we are in this kind of situation, it is about trying to find those little positive moments and recognizing that there will be bumps. And I think in 6 months and 12 months, as we get out of this, if things are still there, that may be something to think a little bit more about. You know, I think one of the best things about social distancing or physical distancing for teenagers is a lot of the risks that they were facing are kind of hard to get into. There's no sneaking into the boot right now. So, you know, that's one option. But I think that the idea that for adolescents, we want to make sure that they're still reaching out to their friends and that they are using their tools and social media to connect. I think for little kids, it's super important to keep them on a routine. So sleep and wake, just like for us, it's really important to keep younger children on a routine. And if there is a little bit more clinginess for your school-age kids or your toddlers, some of that can be expected. And then when you start to worry about it, the first thing that I would want everyone to think about is how much of this is me being frustrated and stuck at home and trying to balance too much responsibilities, and how much of this is a typical behavior on the part of my child. Because our own ability to tolerate differences in behavior changes the more we're stressed. And so part of it is going to be checking your expectations and paying attention to that as well.
Thanks. We've talked a lot about sort of the healthy things that we can do on self-care, but Carrie, and maybe Tonya too on this, or anybody actually, a lot of people do things to extremes, like people will work out all the time or do other things, but right now a lot of us are eating lots of carbs and ice cream, cookies, and more than our share of wine in the evening. So how do we manage the unhealthy coping mechanisms that we might be utilizing to deal with our stress?
I think two things. I think first of all, those things are great, right? And I don't remember, someone earlier said, if you can give yourself little rewards, right? If that ice cream is a reward that is helpful to you, that's great. So I think, again, that kind of like forgiveness and being like, I don't have to have the perfect diet. I can, you know, eat a bunch of carbs if I need to. But also, one thing that can be very helpful is just incorporating that mindfulness. I know we think of mindfulness as like meditation and yoga, which is part of it, but also just even mindfully eating. So, you know, if you're having that ice cream, having one scoop of ice cream and not eating it in front of the TV and then whoops, I ate the whole thing. But taking that one scoop and mindfully paying attention, enjoying it, that also gives you a time to say, I'm going to slow down. I'm going to just, you know, not be on any devices. I'm going to just take the next 15, 20 minutes and eat this scoop of ice cream and really enjoy it and thank myself for my, you know, all the work I put in today. So I think that way it can kind of incorporate some other self-care into that. But, you know, we are going to be expected to be going to those comforts that, you know, in many ways we often think of as unhealthy, and that's okay too.
Thanks. Tonya, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, and I think that applies to wine as well. You know, if you, at the end of the day, if a glass of wine, you know, if it's a case of wine, then we may, you know, need to seek outside help. But if it's a glass of wine or two, and it's really a reward and you're enjoying every sip and you're not just getting through it and then realizing, oh my gosh, I don't know how I drank all of that. You know, those are kind of signs where you may be using it as a coping mechanism and rather than a reward or a treat. And so we want to make sure that you are rewarding yourself and not using it just to kind of escape the reality that we're dealing with right now.
So I put a rubber band around the cabinet with the junk food. So that when I went to it, it made me double think going into it. So it just slowed me down that little bit. And then I also started tracking my eating so that I was making choices. I wasn't always eating the perfect diet, but I was aware of what I had eaten, what I hadn't eaten, and what it was adding up to. So same thing. but I like the rubber band thing.
Karen, we talked a little bit with Stacy about warning signs in children, and I wonder about parents with college-age children, if there are warning signs that they should look out for in terms of how they're coping with this. I know that their social media is something that they're accustomed to, but this has sort of upended their life as well.
I don't think it's that different than it would have been outside of COVID, right? You're looking to see, are they isolating themselves too much in their room? Are they not responding, to your, texts if you're not with them? I think it's sort of the regular things that we look at. I think one issue is that they have been off on their own, often on their, with little kids that are living with you, right? And they've actually changed as a person from when they were in high school. They're not the 18-year-old that they were. So you have to think about them now as the young adult. Again, I'm a parent of that age group, and I have to remind myself that they're not in high school anymore. But I think that the signs would be pretty much the same as before. I think the only thing different might be there's a thing that I read about called anticipatory grief. So again, it's because of the unknowns, it adds another layer. I don't think I'm answering the question exactly, but as I said, I feel like it's sort of the same stuff you would look for anyway. And depression does come on very much in late adolescence, early adulthood, and things like that. I would also possibly add in, especially looking for things like anorexia or other things where those are often disorders where they're trying to take a sense of control over something. And so that may be an extra thing to keep an eye out for. I don't know. Stacy, you want to add anything?
I think we actually just have time for like a final thought. We're running out of time here. So I'm going to start, I think, the opposite direction, go alphabetically backwards, and start with Carrie just for a quick final thought before we leave.
So I guess my final thought is just, again, that reminder of a little, take some time for some self-reflection and some self-awareness of what are the things that are going to be beneficial to you, what are the things that maybe you need to step back from, right? So if you wake up in the middle of the night, maybe turning on your phone and looking up statistics is not what you want to do. So put those behaviors aside. Maybe following a particular blog that makes you smile, even if it's just a bunch of puppies, right? So figuring that out and trying to tailor a little bit, sort of mindfully about what it is that's going to benefit you. It's really my advice.
Thanks. Karen, a final thought?
So I would get back to that sense of being mindful, taking one day at a time, recognizing what you can control, what you can't control. Remember, we're all in this together. Be kind to others, be kind to yourself.
Tonya, one more piece of advice.
I think we just need to remember that people are amazingly resilient and that we will get through this. And we might not know what's coming, but we know that we will get through this, and our new normal will eventually get here.
And Stacy.
Hard to go last. So I think the thing that I would say, particularly to this group, is that all of us have gone through all of this extensive training to think that we know everything. This is a really, really, really important time to own that we don't know everything, and to get radically comfortable with uncertainty, and to find the humor in uncertainty. It's not easy, but it's there. And then I think the really important part that feeds into resilience is to find those moments that you have during this that you might not have had. And, it may be that you are playing a board game for the 89th time with your 5-year-old, but you wouldn't have gotten to play Candyland 89 times with your 5-year-old. If you have teenage kids, especially teenage daughter, like she's in the house with you a lot more than ever before. She doesn't really want to be around you, but take those extra 10 or 15 moments and be grateful for them. And I think, particularly for those of us that are Tulane, remember that we have some of the most amazing healthcare providers scientists and researchers who really are going to make this okay. And what a fabulous place to be and to be a part of when we know that we are going to be on the forefront of addressing this locally and globally, and to really value that. And then the last thing I would say is, every time you see somebody who is working at a grocery store, or still working at a restaurant, or working at a gas station, or any healthcare provider, pause for that moment and thank them. Because I can promise you that grocery clerk does not get thanked very often. And think of the huge, powerful impact that that could have.
So thanks to all of you. I am just honored to be at the same institution that all of you are in, because you're all amazing. So thanks for having us today. Thanks to everybody online for joining us today. We hope to do this again. If you have ideas for future topics, please let us know. And also, I want to close with the fact that tomorrow, some of you may have seen that we had done grand rounds online in the past. So tomorrow we're doing that again. It's now open to the public. For those of you who don't know what grand rounds are, it's where our doctors and researchers share information about the latest issues and treatments, particularly right now around COVID-19. This week's subject is planning for a pandemic, palliative medicine, and clinical ethics preparation. Tomorrow from 12 to 1 on Facebook Live and Zoom. So thanks again for joining us, and everyone please stay safe and well, and thanks again.